The first time I realized my idea wasn't mine anymore was in that boardroom. The room smelled faintly of citrus polish and nerves. The long glass table gleamed beneath recessed lights, 12 chairs, 10 executives, 1 thief. Daniel Cross stood at the head of the table, adjusting his cufflinks like a man rehearsing control. He looked calm. Too calm. And then, he began. Good morning, everyone. I'm proud to introduce Project Elysian, a sustainable luxury initiative designed to redefine Vera & Company's identity in the modern market. My stomach twisted. Every word was mine. The phrasing. The rhythm. Even the tagline I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. perfecting. He clicked through my slides, with the ease of a man strolling through a house he didn't build but had decided to own. The CEO leaned forward, eyes sharp. This is fresh, she said. Finally, someone's thinking about longevity and ethics, not just margins. Around the table, heads nodded. The marketing director scribbled notes. The CFO murmured, brilliant angle. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but my throat betrayed me. All I could do was sit there, my face carefully arranged in professional neutrality, as the room fell in love with my idea in another man's voice. Daniel's tone was flawless. Smooth, precise. He didn't even stumble on the parts he'd once told me were too idealistic. He had memorized them. Perfected them. Claimed them. When the applause came, it was soft but powerful, a quiet storm of approval. Daniel smiled that careful, politician's smile. He shook hands. Nodded humbly. Said all the right words. And then, mid-handshake with the CEO, he glanced at me. Just a flicker of a look. 1 second of acknowledgement, not gratitude, not guilt, just a silent, don't you dare. That's when the humiliation turned into something else. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. Something that promised patience. When the meeting ended, the room filled with the sound of chair legs and small talk. I packed my laptop, pretending not to hear them, the congratulations, the laughter, the plans for champagne later. Daniel stopped by my desk on his way out. Great job on the mock-ups, Ella, he said. He said it the way you'd thank a barista for extra foam, polite, dismissive, meaningless. Then he added, couldn't have done it without you, with a wink that stung worse than any insult. He was already halfway to the elevator before I realized my hands were shaking. Not from sadness. From clarity. I stared at the reflection of the now empty boardroom. The lights above buzzed faintly, casting halos on the polished floor. That table, the same one where I'd sat for months sketching out Elysian's vision, planning sustainability models, crunching budgets, had just become the stage of my erasure. The worst part wasn't that he stole it. It was how easy it was for everyone to believe he was the genius behind it. Because that's how this world works, they see the suit, not the sleepless nights behind it. That morning, something in me cracked, not loud enough for anyone else to hear, but deep enough that I'd never sound the same again. I walked to the restroom, locked the stall door, and sat there staring at my reflection in the stainless steel. My face looked calm. Too calm. I whispered, you knew this would happen one day. And somewhere beneath the humiliation, I felt the first flicker of something dangerous. Resolve. They say betrayal is sudden. But that's a lie. It's slow, a drip that becomes a flood only when it's too late to stop it. That day wasn't the beginning of the betrayal. It was just the moment I finally saw it for what it was. Because if I'm being honest, this didn't start in that boardroom. It started months ago, back when I still believed in Daniel Cross. Back when I thought he saw potential in me. Back when I mistook ambition for mentorship. If you are listening to my story, welcome and consider subscribing. It is free and helps our content reach other women who are facing similar situation. Thank you. Now let's see how this unfolds. They say first days are about introductions. Smiles, handshakes, passwords, new beginnings. Mine started with the smell of roasted coffee and printer ink, the scent of ambition disguised as routine. Vera and Company looked like success had a color palette, white marble floors, bronze accents, fresh orchids at reception. Even the air seemed filtered for confidence. I was a junior strategist, the lowest rung on a very polished ladder. My job was to listen, learn, and, most importantly, not take up space. That first morning, I clutched my notebook like armor. My new manager, Daniel Cross, walked in 2 minutes late, the kind of man who'd turn lateness into charisma. He had that effortless authority people mistake for genius. Perfect tie knot, silver watch, a half smile that looked personal even when it wasn't. Ella, right? Yes. Ella Hart. He nodded, eyes sharp but amused. Welcome to the circus. I laughed, unsure if I was supposed to. He led me past glass offices and curated art. We build brands here, he said. Not campaigns. Stories people want to believe in. Never forget that. That was the first lesson. The second came 15 minutes later, in a meeting I wasn't even supposed to speak in. It was a product launch debrief, glossy slides, sharper egos. I sat quietly, taking notes. Someone made a vague suggestion about redefining sustainability, and before I could stop myself, I spoke. Maybe instead of redefining it, we anchor it to emotion. People don't buy ethics, they buy identity. What if the campaign tells them being responsible feels luxurious? Silence. Then a few nods. Daniel looked at me, expression unreadable. Noted, he said finally. Interesting angle. When the meeting ended, he walked over. Not many people speak on their first day. Should I not have? I asked, flushing. He smiled. No. You should have. Just pick your moments. That was the beginning. Flattery dressed as mentorship. Over the next few weeks, he began inviting me into late-night brainstorms. You think differently, he'd say, handing me a coffee. That's rare here. He'd lean against the desk while I presented rough drafts, asking questions that felt like compliments. How did you come up with that? You ever think about moving up to strategy lead? He made me feel seen. And after years of being invisible, that felt intoxicating. One night, as we reviewed a client proposal, he said, You remind me of me at your age. Hungry. Sharp. You'll go far if you play this right. Play this right. I should have heard the warning in those words. But back then, I didn't see the strings, only the hand that seemed to lift me higher. By the end of my third month, my ideas were showing up in meetings I wasn't invited to. Daniel always summarized them, cleaner, smoother, wrapped in his confident tone. He'd stop by my desk afterward with that same easy grin. They loved the concept, he'd say. Ours was the strongest pitch. Ours. The word sounded generous then. Later, it would sound like theft. Still, I told myself this was how mentorship worked. You learned, you contributed, your ideas evolved through your boss's voice. That's what I believed, until the day the Project Elysian folder disappeared from my drive. But that's a story for later. For now, I was still the grateful newcomer. Still believing that recognition comes to those who work hardest. Still mistaking attention for opportunity. If I had known how easily admiration turns into ownership in this world, maybe I would have written my ideas in ink instead of trust. The first time I heard Daniel quote me word for word, I almost clapped. He stood at the front of the glass conference room, sleeves rolled up like he'd personally invented creativity, and said, Luxury isn't a price point. It's a feeling people want to belong to. Everyone nodded thoughtfully, like Moses had just come down from Mount Branding with commandments etched in Helvetica. I blinked. That was my line. From the strategy notes I'd written at 2 a.m., fueled by cold noodles and professional delusion. But of course, no one knew that. Daniel didn't even look at me. He just clicked to the next slide, my slide, and said, "We're pioneering something emotional here." After the meeting, he stopped by my desk and tapped my notebook like a benevolent professor. "Good instincts," he said. "You're learning fast." Right. Apparently, I was learning so fast that I'd already mastered ventriloquism. That became our unspoken ritual. He borrowed my words, I borrowed his approval. He gave me opportunities. I gave him unpaid intellectual labor. At night, he'd message me. "Need your take before tomorrow. Just quick thoughts." Which, translated from corporate to English, meant, "Do the thinking now so I can present it in the morning." I'd reply instantly, "Of course." Because ambition is caffeine for people who can't afford therapy. Next morning, my phrasing would echo across the room in his voice, perfectly polished, perfectly his. I'd sit there, smiling politely, like a vent in an over-air-conditioned room, necessary but invisible. Then came the Aurora campaign. Big fragrance brand. Big money. Bigger egos. I stayed late working on it. The last one in the office, my laptop screen glowing like a confessional. When I wrote "She doesn't follow light. She becomes it," I remember thinking. This could change everything. And it did, just not for me. The next morning, Daniel called me in. "They loved it," he said, standing by the window like he'd personally bottled the scent. The emotional narrative, the tagline, genius. My heart stumbled a little. That was mine. He smiled that PR-trained smile. "Of course. We're a team, Ella. It's all of ours." Ah yes. Team. That mystical word executives use when they mean my idea now, thanks. After that, I started noticing things. Emails I wasn't copied on. Meetings I was too junior to attend. Decks that looked strangely familiar, except for the part where my name wasn't on them. Still, Daniel was all charm. He'd show up with 2 coffees, hand me one, and say, "You're my secret weapon." And I'd smile, pretending not to know that weapons don't get credit, they just get deployed. One evening, I overheard 2 senior managers by the elevator. "Cross is brilliant," one said. "Yeah, that new emotional strategy? Revolutionary." They stepped inside, doors sliding shut on their admiration. I stood there with my bag and a sinking truth. Apparently, I'd just revolutionized luxury marketing, anonymously. That night, I opened my journal, the one Daniel once called cute. At the top of a blank page, I wrote, "Start keeping receipts." And that was it. The moment the intern they underestimated began quietly plotting the downfall of their favorite visionary. There's a special kind of silence that happens in offices. The kind that hums just loud enough to cover the sound of betrayal. By the time spring rolled around, I'd become fluent in that silence. Every click of the coffee machine, every just circling back email, they all said the same thing. "Know your place, Ella. And stay there." So I did. Outwardly. But inside, I was building a map. I started noticing the details first, the kind people in charge never see. Who got called into meetings last minute? Who got copied on the wrong threads? Whose names disappeared from slides the day before client presentations? Pattern recognition, that was my real job now. Daniel still smiled when he saw me. Still called me kiddo like he'd discovered me at a talent show. Still took my words, my phrasing, my midnight ideas, and wore them like a tailored suit. Only difference? Now I was watching. I kept everything. Drafts, timestamps, Slack messages, calendar invites. Even screenshots, the digital equivalent of holy relics. Each one a quiet truth he couldn't rewrite. Sometimes I'd imagine what it would feel like to drop them all at once. A perfect detonation of evidence. But not yet. Not while the system still thought it had me trained. My strategy was simple. Smile more. Speak less. Let him think I was still the grateful intern. The thing about power is, it's lazy. Once it believes it owns you, it stops looking closely. And Daniel had stopped looking. The shift began during a Tuesday meeting, one of those endless status updates where people spoke in circles and called it alignment. He was talking about the new emotional economy of branding, using all my phrasing again, when the head of strategy cut in. Daniel, that phrasing, wasn't that from Ella's draft? A flicker. Barely a second. But I saw it, the glitch in his confidence. He recovered fast, of course. Oh, yes, he said smoothly. We collaborate on everything. She's a star. The table nodded. I smiled. And in that moment, I understood something important. He wasn't invincible. He was just consistent. Later that week, I tested a theory. I emailed him a decoy idea, something deliberately mediocre, dressed up in jargon. 2 hours later, he pitched it to the leadership team as innovative. They applauded. I took notes. There's a special kind of satisfaction that comes from watching someone hang themselves with your own rope. Especially when they're too arrogant to notice you're the one handing it to them. Meanwhile, I started befriending the people he ignored. The junior designers, the assistants, the interns. The ones who actually kept the machine running while the visionaries took credit. They were tired. Underpaid. Overlooked. But they noticed everything. It didn't take long before they started whispering their own stories. How he'd stolen concepts, edited credits, rewritten timelines to erase other names. It wasn't just me. It was everyone too polite to confront him. By the end of that month, I had more than screenshots. I had witnesses. On Friday, Daniel stopped by my desk. Big week, he said, leaning casually against the divider. You've really grown into the role. I smiled. Thanks. Just trying to learn from the best. He grinned, that effortless, PR-approved grin. And for the first time, I wasn't angry. I was entertained. Because he had no idea the grateful intern was quietly building his exit strategy. One timestamp, one email, one borrowed sentence at a time. It was one of those mornings that looked expensive. The kind of day that the company's glass tower seemed built for, sunlight spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows, city traffic crawling below like obedient subjects. The boardroom smelled of new furniture and old ambition. Someone had ordered fresh lilies for the table. They looked out of place, too innocent for a room where reputations were currency. This was the day of the presentation, the pitch that would either secure the biggest client of the year or quietly end several careers. Mine included. I'd spent weeks perfecting it, every slide, every headline, every insight grounded in real research and midnight caffeine. I knew it was the best thing I'd ever done. Maybe the best thing the department had seen in years. And Daniel, my boss, the company's golden boy with a jawline made for press photos, had been suspiciously quiet about it all week. That should have been my first warning. When I walked in, the meeting had already started. He was at the front of the room, sleeves rolled up, voice smooth as honey on marble. My slides glowed behind him. My words. My phrasing. My data. Everything except my name. He clicked through the deck like he was born knowing it, punctuating each insight with the casual confidence of a man convinced of his own genius. The clients were nodding. One even whispered, "Brilliant direction." Daniel smiled modestly, that particular brand of fake humility only executives perfect. I stood near the back, notebook in hand, pretending to take notes. Inside, every muscle in my body went still, not in shock, but in clarity. I'd seen him steal before. But never this boldly. Never on a stage this large. He paused for effect on the final slide, the emotional rebrand, turning consumer loyalty into human connection. The title was mine, word for word. The room erupted in polite applause. He turned, spotted me, and smiled. Then he said it, the sentence that made my hands tremble. Of course, my team helped put this together, special thanks to Ella for the graphics. Beautiful work. Graphics. The word landed like an insult wearing perfume. For a moment, I thought I might actually laugh. Not out of humor, but out of disbelief that this was how he saw me, decoration. The clients began asking questions, and Daniel handled them with the slick assurance of someone used to applause. When one of them asked about the research model, he stumbled only for a second, and I saw his eyes flicker toward me. I smiled. He looked away. Because he knew. He knew that I knew. After the meeting, people swarmed him, handshakes, congratulations, the ritual dance of corporate praise. I stood by the window, watching the skyline reflect on the glass, tall, untouchable, and full of ghosts like me. Daniel finally walked over, smug and buoyant. Ella, that went perfectly, he said. You should be proud. Of the graphics? I asked. He hesitated. Just a heartbeat. Then he laughed. Don't be sensitive. This is how the game works. You'll get your moment. That line, you'll get your moment. It's what people like him always say right before taking it away. I nodded, expression calm. Of course, I said softly. Congratulations, Daniel. You really owned that presentation. He grinned, mistaking my tone for admiration. He always did. Back at my desk, I opened the file directory. There it was, final presentation _V12 Ella _draft. Timestamped. Watermarked. Every iteration saved. I uploaded them, quietly, systematically, into a private drive labeled Archive, Internal Use. Then I began writing an internal memo for the next client phase. And at the bottom, in small text, I added a note. Original creative direction and data analysis prepared by E. Rivers. It wasn't revenge yet. Not even close. It was just precision. That afternoon, HR sent a congratulatory company-wide email. Our creative director Daniel Pierce secures the Marvin account with an outstanding presentation. Attached were photos. Daniel shaking hands, Daniel smiling with the clients, Daniel looking inspirational. In one of the photos, I appeared in the corner of the frame, blurry, half cut out, like an afterthought. I stared at it for a long time. And then, slowly, I smiled. Because the thing about being invisible is, people forget you can move quietly. And in an office built on performance, silence is the most underrated weapon of all. The office had a rhythm, the kind of rhythm you only notice once you stop dancing to it. Emails pinged like tiny metronomes. Footsteps echoed over marble floors. Coffee machines gurgled their monotone song of productivity. I had learned to move in the gaps. Between meetings. Between memos. Between Daniel's grandstanding. It was there, in those spaces, that I started gathering my proof. I began with the obvious, files, timestamps, drafts, Slack messages. Every slide I had created. Every line of research. Every tagline, every insight Daniel had borrowed and polished. It was meticulous work, the sort of labor no one notices until it explodes in their face. I set up a hidden folder in the cloud. Encrypted. Private. Untouchable by anyone who wasn't me. I labeled it Exhibit A Corporate Theft, Chronological Order. The title made me smile, like an undertone in a song no one else could hear. Next, I started observing him differently. Daniel had patterns, predictable, like an expensive watch. He always took the best slide for himself. He always phrased my words in slides in meetings, but never in emails. He leaned on charm to mask insecurity. He underestimated the quiet ones. I wrote it all down. Every movement, every small lie, every strategic omission. But proof alone wasn't enough. I needed witnesses. Allies. People who had been quietly overlooked but were sharp, perceptive, and deeply loyal to work, not titles. I started with the junior team. The designer who stayed late to tweak client visuals, unnoticed. The analyst who recalculated margins 3 times to catch errors Daniel never admitted existed. The intern who formatted decks at midnight while he got the credit in the morning. I didn't say much. I didn't announce my plan. I simply reminded them, subtly, that someone was paying attention. A nod here. A quiet compliment there. An approving smile at a suggestion he would have ignored. And slowly, quietly, I saw the shift. People started taking notes for themselves. People started keeping their own records. People started speaking up, carefully, subtly, like a chorus warming up before the big crescendo. One afternoon, Daniel stormed into the office, looking flustered. He was holding a printed deck, his voice tight with indignation. "Ella. Did you see this?" I looked up from my notebook. "See what?" I asked innocently, though I already knew. He waved the paper. "My team tells me someone circulated my presentation internally before the client even got it. This is a breach." I smiled, just slightly, polite. "Interesting," I said. Maybe someone was just eager to ensure the client had the most updated information. His face twitched. "You're implying?" I shook my head, notebook open, pen poised. "Nothing. Just that it's important we maintain professional standards." He left the office fuming, muttering under his breath. By the end of the month, I had more than proof. I had an invisible network. A web of colleagues who trusted me, who respected me, who had been overlooked for years but finally felt seen. And Daniel still had no idea. Because the brilliance of quiet revenge, the kind I was cultivating, is that it looks like nothing. Politeness. Observance. Professionalism. All while building a record that, when revealed, would be undeniable. I looked around my desk that evening. The city outside the window shimmered, indifferent and endless. I tapped the top of my folder labeled Exhibit A, and for the first time, I felt a surge of anticipation. Not rage. Not triumph. Anticipation. The kind that comes when the chessboard is set, and every pawn is in place. And your opponent still thinks they're playing checkers. Monday mornings at Halberd and Chase had always felt like a war drill. Except everyone believed it was a team-building exercise. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and ambition, while the marble floors gleamed with a perfection that mocked human error. I arrived early, of course. Not because I wanted to, but because I had learned that control was easiest when your enemy thought they had it. The week began quietly, almost innocuously. A misfiled report here. A missed calendar invite there. Each small disruption a pebble in the carefully constructed machinery of Daniel's ego. I had instructed my allies subtly. Copy me on everything, but pretend it's routine. Document every interaction, but act casual. Offer minor suggestions, framed as just thinking aloud. And the best part? They followed instructions without realizing they were participating in a small rebellion. By Tuesday, the first fissures began to appear. Daniel walked past my desk, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like my idea for a client slogan. I smiled. He paused. Eyebrows raised. Then he moved on. Subtle. But I saw the uncertainty. The tiniest pause, enough for me to know that his confidence wasn't as unshakable as he pretended. At lunch, I met with the junior team in the small cafeteria corner that smelled faintly of reheated chicken and ambition. I called it a strategy huddle, though it was really a briefing. Remember, your contributions matter. Document everything. If it seems small, it isn't. Invisible work becomes visible very quickly, if you know where to look. Their eyes lit up, not with fear, but with something rarer, excitement. People loved being seen. They hated being ignored. And I promised them they wouldn't be. By Wednesday, Daniel's first real sign of awareness came, though he didn't yet know what he was seeing. He asked for the Aurora campaign deck. I handed it over. He flipped through it, nodding, but then paused. Ella, did you change something here? I raised an eyebrow innocently. Just clarifying points you had noted in your own comments, I said sweetly. He frowned. His fingers lingered over the track changes I had left deliberately, subtle enough that only someone looking closely would notice. Later that afternoon, I orchestrated a small miracle. A miscommunication between two directors over budget allocations, minor, harmless, but enough to generate a flurry of emails. I didn't start it. I just nudged it gently with a "Did you see this?" note, copied to the relevant channels. By the time Daniel realized, the office was already buzzing. He tried to step in, to assert control. But my allies, the people he had underestimated, stepped up with solutions. Polite. Professional. Unmistakably competent. And Daniel? He had to smile. Just a little. Because he couldn't openly admit he'd been outmaneuvered by the grateful intern. By Thursday, the pressure cooker was humming. People began anticipating my moves. Emails were sharper. Meetings ran on time. Minor inefficiencies corrected themselves before Daniel even noticed them. I kept my expression calm. Polite. Grateful, even. But inside, I was a conductor, orchestrating the subtle collapse of his control while everyone thought it was normal workflow. That evening, as I packed my bag, I paused by the window. The city below glittered like data points on a chart, each light representing ambition, effort, someone trying to be seen. I thought about the week. About the quiet network I had built. About the subtle fractures I had introduced. And I smiled. Because vengeance didn't need fireworks. It didn't need confrontation. It thrived in silence, in observation, in tiny adjustments that compounded over time. I left the office knowing one thing. By the end of the month, Daniel wouldn't just notice resistance. He'd feel it. In his calendar conflicts. In the precise, polite pushback of people he had always thought he controlled. In the way his own words were reflected back at him, not polished, not rehearsed, but true. And when that happened? He'd realize, finally, that the grateful intern was no longer invisible. Friday morning arrived like a powder keg in silk slippers. The sunlight spilled through the office, glinting off glass and chrome, making everything look far too pristine for the chaos that brewed beneath. I arrived early, as always. My heels clicked on marble, a deliberate echo, each step a metronome of control. Daniel's office was already buzzing with assistants arranging his morning coffee, perfectly frothy, a ritual I had long stopped envying. I took my usual spot near the window, notebook open, eyes scanning the room like a hawk circling over prey it had already tagged. The opportunity came disguised as a meeting request. Daniel had called a strategy review with the senior team. When I entered, he was mid-sentence, gesturing grandly toward a slide, my slide, now titled with his name in bold, Aurora Campaign, Emotional Branding Strategy. The room applauded politely. I smiled. Inside, I was calm. Outside, everyone could see the same composed intern who had brought him coffee 3 weeks ago. I began my move. A subtle email, nothing flashy, no accusations. Just enough. Subject, review notes for Aurora Deck. Team. For accuracy and full transparency, I've attached the original analysis, with data sources and timestamps. Let's ensure all client-facing materials reflect the most recent insights. I knew Daniel would see it immediately. And he did. I watched him open it on the shared screen, his brow twitching slightly, a flicker of irritation passing through the well-practiced mask. The room filled with murmurs. My allies, sitting quietly, glanced at one another, nodding just slightly, like soldiers recognizing a signal. No one spoke. No one applauded. The air thickened with tension. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to recover. "Ah, thank you, Ella," he said. Polite. Professional. Forced. Not commanding. Not in control. Then came the subtle cascade. A question from one of the clients. "Daniel, could you clarify this data point?" He gestured vaguely. I leaned slightly forward, smiling like sunshine through tinted glass. "Actually, that data comes from the research I compiled last week. If you'd like, I can walk you through the methodology in detail." There it was, the first direct contribution recognized in front of the clients. He didn't like it. He tried to smile, but it was too tight. The meeting ended with polite applause. Clients praised the clarity of insights. I had done nothing more than speak the truth, calmly, professionally, with precision. Later, at my desk, I reviewed the reactions. Slack channels buzzing with murmurs. Ella's insight really helped. She explained it better than anyone expected. Finally, someone with the full picture. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, a ripple in a pond that would grow larger with every meeting. I sent a quiet note to my allies. "Well done. Keep documenting everything. Small steps. We're building momentum." The brilliance of revenge, I reminded myself, was that it didn't need to be explosive. It needed to be inevitable. Daniel would soon notice. He would feel the shift. He would sense the subtle collapse of his absolute control. And by then, it would be too late to stop it. That evening, I walked past the boardroom, lights dimming. The city skyline glittered like a chessboard. Every office window a piece in motion. I smiled quietly to myself. Because the game had started. Not with fury. Not with confrontation. But with precise, professional, undeniable moves. And I had already won the first round. Monday arrived like a carefully rehearsed surprise. The office hummed with its usual over-polished energy. But something was different. The air carried the faint scent of unease. A whisper that something in the system had shifted. I arrived early, notebook in hand, scanning the floor like someone reading an invisible map. The junior team had taken notice. Even the interns who usually stayed silent were now exchanging glances, small nods of acknowledgement that I saw clearly from across the room. The first sign was subtle, an email thread that had previously been ignored. My correction from Friday, nothing aggressive, just factual, had been forwarded to Daniel by one of his own managers. I watched him in the cafeteria later, trying to command authority with his usual charm. But every attempt was met with polite but pointed pushback. The junior team offered solutions before he could speak. The assistants began double-checking each other's work, a quiet army forming under my influence. By mid-morning, the ripple became noticeable. During a strategy call, a director spoke up. "Actually, I think Ella's analysis from last week might be more precise." Daniel's hand twitched, just slightly, as if the universe had whispered, "You're not in charge here." He cleared his throat. "Ah, yes, thank you, Ella." A pause. The director smiled politely, nodding, subtly confirming the truth of the statement. Daniel's face fell just enough to be noticeable if you were paying attention. I was. I spent the rest of the day documenting every small fracture. Misaligned project timelines that no one dared to blame him for. Polite corrections from staff he previously overruled. Email threads where his phrasing was corrected or improved by others. Moments where he hesitated before giving instructions, unsure if his authority still held. Each one a domino. Silent, invisible, inevitable. By Wednesday, whispers of recognition began spreading. Ella really knows her numbers. Her work explains what we've been missing. Finally, someone sees the whole picture. The room no longer saw her as just the polite, grateful intern. I had become something else. A quiet force, subtle yet undeniable. A lens that revealed the cracks in the polished exterior of office hierarchy. Daniel noticed, of course. I could see it in his eyes during meetings. The little pauses, the hesitation before speaking. The faint tightness in his smile. It was the shadow of uncertainty, the first ghost of lost control. I began coordinating more deliberately with my allies. Shared insights, framed as friendly suggestions. Subtle reminders of deadlines Daniel had forgotten. Strategic nudges in client communications. It was elegant. Invisible. Poetic in its quiet cruelty. By Friday, the dominoes had multiplied. One manager politely corrected a misstatement Daniel made during a client call. Another quietly overrode a misallocated budget line, without fanfare, without confrontation. And the interns? They started documenting their own contributions openly, adding to the growing evidence of his borrowed credit. Daniel left the office that day, unaware of the full extent of the shift. But his confidence had a fissure now, just enough for me to see it. As I stood by the window that evening, city lights blinking like distant data points, I realized the pattern was unstoppable. Small corrections. Quiet interventions. Invisible recognition of truth. The system was bending under its own weight. And I was simply guiding it. Like a river shaping rock over decades. Except this river had been fed by months of careful observation and silent strategy. And the best part? It still looked like nothing. Like normal work. Like politeness. Except it wasn't. It was the beginning of the end of Daniel's reign. The first visible consequence of months of meticulous preparation. Monday morning arrived like a storm in a teacup. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh flowers and fear, not mine, of course, but the kind that comes from realizing you're no longer in control. I walked in, notebook under arm, heels clicking on marble like a metronome announcing inevitability. Daniel was already in the boardroom, practicing his charm in front of a mirror, a ritual I had learned to watch with quiet amusement. He had no idea the boardroom itself was about to witness the quiet collapse of his authority. The day's client presentation started like any other. Slides polished, data gleaming, Daniel smiling with rehearsed confidence. I sat near the edge of the room, notebook open, eyes scanning, calm as a librarian watching chaos unfold in slow motion. Then it began. The subtle interventions I had planted over months converged in a single, undeniable moment. The assistant reminded Daniel of a key statistic he had incorrectly cited. One of the directors cited my research during a question, with no hesitation. An intern, quietly, offered a correction that improved his phrasing mid-presentation. Every error he tried to hide was highlighted, politely, professionally, in plain sight. The clients noticed. Daniel noticed. I noticed. By the end, Daniel was fumbling. Not angrily. Not dramatically. But with that subtle, creeping uncertainty that comes when you realize someone has been quietly rewriting the rules right under your nose. I spoke once, softly, carefully. If you'd like, I can walk through the methodology from start to finish. It's all fully documented. The room went silent. Every eye turned. Even Daniel's. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried to smile, then gave a polite nod. Not leadership. Not authority. Submission. After the clients left, the office buzzed in whispers. Praise no longer went to Daniel. It went to me. Not loudly, not dramatically. But unmistakably. The board noticed. The HR director noticed. Even Daniel noticed, though he would never admit it. I walked past him in the hallway, notebook in hand. Well done today, I said lightly. I couldn't have done it without the team, he replied, forced and careful. Of course, I said, smiling faintly. We all have our roles. The smile lingered. Polite. Precise. Full of quiet triumph. That evening, I walked past the city skyline, lights blinking like stars captured in glass. I paused, notebook in hand, and wrote a single note in the margin. Checkmate. The dominoes had fallen. The quiet network had worked. And the office, every corner, every shadow, had finally acknowledged what had always been true. I was never invisible. I had just been waiting. Months later, analysts would call it the Rivers method. A quiet authority, meticulous observation, and slow-burn strategy that dismantled arrogance without raising a hand. Articles appeared in business magazines. Conferences cited it as revolutionary. And somewhere, Daniel Pierce's name became a footnote in the story of a grateful intern who refused to stay invisible. I never chased the headlines. I stayed in the background. Observed. Planned. Executed. Because the most dangerous power is the one no one notices until it's already done. And to all of you watching this story unfold, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told to wait your turn, this one's for you. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, the kind that turn quiet resilience into unstoppable power. Drop a comment. Have you ever quietly outsmarted someone who underestimated you? Let's talk about it.